Should we be able to build a revolutionary movement, frightened reactionaries will quickly attempt to smear it by distorting its aims and making false comparisons to other revolutions and social protests. Their goal will be to crush the movement in its infancy before it gains widespread support. To preempt that inevitable tactic, an assessment of major revolutions of the past century and how their goals compare with ours may be valuable. The 1917 Russian Revolution was ostensibly a movement to establish a, quote, dictatorship of the proletariat, as described by Karl Marx. However, the result was not a classless society in which workers were in control. Instead, the revolution produced at best an oligarchy, and at worst a dictatorship, not of the workers but of the Communist Party. Lenin, Stalin, and their cohorts dispensed with the monarchy of the Russian Empire and replaced it with the no less absolute tyrannical authority of the Soviet Union, which became a greater empire than the Tsar's ever was. We who want radical change in this country should not emulate the brutal methods of gaining power and the inhumane uses of that power used by the Russian revolutionaries. The victory of Communist Chinese over their nationalist opponents in China in 1949 did not result in an ideologically pure Marxist regime. Instead, as in the Soviet Union, the consequence was a dictatorship, first of one man, Mao Zedong, then of the Communist Party, which persists today. Due to the ruthless implementation of misguided policies, both Russian and Chinese revolutionaries were responsible for more than 30 million deaths in their own countries. But neither those casualties nor the enthusiasm of those responsible for them produced long-lasting success. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union collapsed under its own weight and pressure from its adversaries. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party effectively rejected the fundamental economics of communism and began experimenting with capitalism. 25 years later, those experiments have helped to create a new global superpower with the world's second largest economy, but no thanks to Maoism. The Chinese Revolution is no model for Americans who have no interest in establishing a one-party rule and the concomitant police state that supports it. Like in China and in Russia, Fidel Castro's revolution in Cuba quickly degenerated into personal dictatorship. Cuban revolutionaries wanted to purge Cuba of the corrupt government of Batista and eliminate the pervasive American corporate influence in Cuban affairs. They wanted to alleviate poverty, improve education, and give land owned by foreign companies to poor landless Cubans. Cuban revolutionaries concluded that these goals could not be achieved without violently silencing political opponents, controlling the media, ruling by dictatorship, and later, becoming a nuclear weapons base as a willing pawn in the Cold War contest. Today's American revolutionaries may well approve of many of the goals of the Cuban revolutionaries, but not their methods or their eventual results. Hugo Chavez was a wannabe revolutionary whose genuine desire to help poor people in Venezuela and to subvert insidious American influence in South America were ultimately unrealized due to his overwhelming ego and underwhelming competence. Despite actual charisma, popularity, and support, Chavez proved himself incapable of pursuing his goals without muzzling the press, stifling his political opponents, and bulldozing changes into the Constitution that endowed him with immense power. This while hypocritically criticizing the U.S. for deficiencies in its democratic system. Somehow, 14 years in office was not enough time for Chavez to build the country he surely sincerely wanted. Today, despite being an oil-rich OPEC nation, Venezuela has trouble keeping its lights on. Like his mentor Chavez, Venezuela's current president Maduro blames everything on political opponents, terrorists, and the United States. The truth is that Maduro has just as little executive skill as Chavez and less charisma. Chavez's inability to transform his country, despite plenty of time, plenty of support, plenty of money, and plenty of worthy goals, exposes him as a well-meaning but inept political leader. Like Venezuela, America has a disintegrating infrastructure, a corrupt political system ruined by pervasive corporate infiltration, and an inexcusable number of impoverished people languishing in a land of riches. Americans, therefore, may share the goals of Chavez for equal opportunity, for the alleviation of poverty, for expanded democracy, for minimizing the influence of the wealthy. But any revolution must be conducted with far greater intelligence and far less egotism than Hugo Chavez demonstrated. The so-called Arab Spring revolutions, which began in 2011, are different than the others. These were truly mass movements without clearly defined leadership. They demonstrate that lots of angry people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for fundamental change can succeed. That frightening lesson was recognized by, among others, China, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, who took steps either to preemptively liberalize or to intensify repression of discontent, or both. The revolutions in North Africa and in the Middle East resulted from decades of unrelenting oppression, poverty, and stagnation. Isolated individuals who dreamt of change could now be connected with one another through social media, and soon hundreds of thousands and even millions banded together to reclaim their lives and to build a better future for themselves and their posterity. None of these movements has achieved complete success, but none of these movements has given up either. For would-be American revolutionaries, the Arab Spring is profoundly insightful. In some of the most oppressive, secretive police states, masses of poor men and women, some uneducated or even illiterate, shopkeepers, herders, computer programmers, doctors, lawyers, tradesmen, were able to effect radical change in an historical blink of the eye. If they can do it, why can't we?